My name is Elena Hartley. I am 28 years old. For 3 years, every job I applied for mysteriously disappeared the moment it got close to hiring me. Managers would smile during interviews. They would shake my hand. They would say things like, "You seem perfect for the position." Then 48 hours later, I would receive the same polite message. We decided to move forward with other candidates. At first I believed them. Then I stopped believing. Because the 5th time it happened, one manager slipped up. He lowered his voice like he was about to confess a crime. "Listen," he said carefully, "someone called about you." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He rubbed his forehead. "They said you had a criminal history." The words hit like ice water. I had never been arrested. Not once. Not even a parking ticket. But by the time I turned 27, I was sleeping on a thin mattress in a homeless shelter, washing my hair in a gas station sink, and living on one cheap meal a day. And the worst part? The person destroying my life texted me every Sunday. My father. His message never changed. "Come home. Apologize. Maybe we will forgive you. Forgive me. For wanting a life." But before I explain how my parents turned an entire town against me, you need to understand where this story really began. A tiny town called Raven Hollow, Ohio. Population barely 4,000. One grocery store. One high school. One diner where the same meatloaf recipe had been served for 30 years. The kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. My family, the Hartleys, were considered respectable people. My father, Richard Hartley, worked as a supervisor at the local steel parts factory for nearly 2 decades before it shut down. My mother, Linda Hartley, volunteered at church food drives and charity bake sales. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect small-town family. But inside our house, life followed rules no one else could see. I did not receive my own house key until I was 20. I was not allowed to drive farther than 10 miles without permission. Every paycheck I earned working after school went into a joint account my mother controlled. I never questioned it. I thought that was normal. I graduated first in my class. My guidance counselor once told me I could win real scholarships. He gave me brochures for universities. When I brought them home, my father did not even open them. He pushed them aside and said something I will never forget. "College is for people who cannot handle real work." So I stayed. I cooked. I cleaned. I mowed the lawn. I helped my mother in the garden. Every night at dinner my father would lean back in his chair and repeat the same sentence. "You have food, a roof, and family. What more does a girl need?" For years, I had no answer. Until the day I realized something terrifying. If I stayed in that house, I would never have a life of my own. And the moment I tried to leave, my parents began destroying it. The week after my 25th birthday, something inside me finally snapped. It was not dramatic. There was no screaming match. No slammed doors. No moment where I packed my bags and ran away in the middle of the night. It was much quieter than that. I was standing in the kitchen, scrubbing the same heavy iron skillet I had washed almost every day since I was 12 years old. The sink water was cold, the window fogged with steam, and my father's voice echoed from the living room where the television was playing the evening news. And suddenly a thought appeared in my mind so clearly it felt like someone had spoken it out loud. "You are going to be 40 years old, standing in this exact same spot." The idea hit me like a punch. 40. Still washing dishes. Still asking permission to leave the house. Still listening to my father explain how the outside world was dangerous. That night I barely slept. The next morning, instead of going straight home after running errands for my mother, I walked 3 blocks farther down Main Street to the Raven Hollow Public Library. The building was small and quiet. Old computers sat along the back wall, their keyboards worn shiny by years of use. I sat down at one of them and stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From hope. Because for the first time in my life, I was about to do something without my parents knowing. I created a brand new email address. Not the family account my mother checked every night. One that belonged only to me. Then I started searching job listings in nearby towns. 20 minutes east, in a place called Millbridge, a hardware store needed a full-time sales associate. 9 to 5 schedule. Health insurance after 3 months. It sounded like freedom. I typed my application slowly with 2 fingers, double-checking every word. When I finished, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I almost closed the browser. Almost told myself it was impossible. Instead, I clicked send. 2 days later, an email appeared. They wanted to interview me Thursday morning. I read the message 3 times just to make sure it was real. When Thursday arrived, I told my parents I was visiting the library again. My father barely looked up from his newspaper. The drive to Millbridge took 20 minutes. I spent the entire trip imagining what life might look like if I got the job. A small apartment. My own bank account. Maybe even college classes someday. The store manager greeted me at the door with a firm handshake. His name was Tom Fletcher, a middle-aged man with reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. At first everything went perfectly. He smiled. Asked about my experience. Complimented my grades. Then something changed. He glanced down at the printed copy of my application on his desk and slowly removed his glasses. "Elena," he said carefully, "before we go any further, I need to ask you something." My stomach tightened. "Okay." He hesitated. "Is there anything in your background we should know about?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We received a phone call yesterday," he said. "Someone claimed you were involved in a theft case." The room tilted. "That is not true," I said immediately. "I have never been arrested." Tom looked uncomfortable. "I believe you," he said quietly. But someone was very convincing. 10 minutes later, the interview was over. And so was my first chance at freedom. When I drove back into my parents' driveway, my father was sitting on the porch reading his newspaper. He did not even look surprised to see me. He simply turned a page and asked calmly, "How was your day?" In that moment, a terrible thought crept into my mind. What if the phone call had come from inside my own house? For the next few days, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Parents did not sabotage their own children. That was something you saw in movies or read about in terrible news stories. It was not something that happened inside a quiet house on Maple Lane. So I pushed the thought away. I told myself the hardware store manager must have misunderstood something. Maybe someone confused me with another person. Maybe the call had nothing to do with my parents at all. But the doubt stayed. And over the next 6 weeks, that doubt grew into something much darker. I applied for 3 more jobs. A grocery store in Ridgemont needed a stock clerk. A shipping warehouse on the county line was hiring entry-level workers. A diner in Cooperton needed a morning hostess. All 3 places called me for interviews. All 3 seemed excited to meet me. And all 3 rejected me within 2 days. The grocery store emailed me a short message saying the position had already been filled. The warehouse never returned my calls. But the diner was different. The owner, a woman named Patricia Lawson, had kind eyes and a voice that sounded like she had been running a restaurant for 30 years. When I came in for my interview, she greeted me warmly and asked me to sit in one of the booths. Halfway through our conversation, her expression changed. She leaned across the table and lowered her voice. "Honey," she said gently, "I need to ask you something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated. Did you ever have trouble with the law? My chest went cold. No, I said quickly. Never. Patricia studied my face for a long moment. Then she sighed. This morning someone called about you. My hands clenched in my lap. What did they say? She looked uncomfortable. They claimed you had been involved in fraud and theft. My heart began pounding. Did they say who they were? Patricia nodded slowly. They said they were a concerned neighbor. A neighbor. I drove home in complete silence. The road blurred in front of me while one terrifying possibility repeated inside my head. When I reached the house, both of my parents were already asleep. The lights were off. The hallway was quiet. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the silence. Then I did something I had never done before. I walked into my mother's sewing room. The desk drawer slid open easily. Inside were fabric scraps, sewing needles, and stacks of folded receipts. And beneath them, a small blue notebook. My hands began to shake before I even opened it. The first page was filled with my mother's neat handwriting. On the left side were names: Millbridge Hardware, Ridgemont Market, County Line Warehouse, Cooperton Family Diner. Every place I had applied. Every single one. On the right side of the page were red check marks. Beside each name was a short note written in pencil. Called manager. Warned them. Told them about theft charge. The room suddenly felt too small. My mother had been tracking me. Tracking every application. Tracking every interview. And sabotaging every chance I had to leave. I stood there staring at the notebook while a cold realization spread through my chest. This was not an accident. This was not overprotective parenting. This was a plan. A deliberate, careful plan to make sure I never escaped that house. I closed the notebook slowly and placed it back in the drawer. Then I walked to my bedroom. I did not sleep that night. Because one question kept repeating in my mind over and over again. How do you fight the people who raised you? And the next morning, I decided I was going to find out. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying what I had seen in that blue notebook over and over again. Every job. Every interview. Every opportunity. My mother had written them all down like a checklist. And next to each one was proof she had destroyed it. By morning, the shock had turned into something colder. Clarity. At 7:12 a.m., my parents were in the kitchen eating breakfast like every other day. My father sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper. My mother stood at the counter pouring coffee. The radio played soft country music in the background. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I walked in holding the blue notebook. My mother noticed it immediately. Her hand froze halfway through pouring coffee. The dark liquid spilled over the mug and onto the counter. I placed the notebook on the table. Explain this, I said. The room went completely silent. My father slowly folded his newspaper and set it beside his plate. My mother stared at the notebook like it might disappear if she waited long enough. Then the tears started. You went through my things, she whispered, her voice shaking. Is this how I raised you? The words stunned me. You called my employers, I said. You told them I was a criminal. I did it because I love you, she cried, pressing a hand to her chest. The world out there is dangerous. I am 25, I said. Not a child. My father picked up his fork and calmly took another bite of toast. We are protecting you, Elena. Protecting me? My voice cracked. You ruined every job I tried to get. He shrugged slightly. You are not ready to live on your own. I decide that, I said. For the first time, my father looked directly at me. His expression was calm. Almost bored. No, he said. You do not. I felt anger rising in my chest. If you do not stop calling employers, I said, I will go to the police. My father laughed softly. A short, cold sound. And tell them what? He asked. That your mother made a phone call? I did not answer. Because he was right. Then I said the only thing I could think of. If this does not stop, I said quietly, I am leaving. The room fell silent again. My father leaned back in his chair. You walk out that door, he said slowly, you walk out with nothing. I frowned. What does that mean? It means your money stays here. Your documents stay here. Everything. My heart dropped. You cannot do that. My mother wiped her tears away. That account has my name on it, she said. We opened it when you were 16. Years of paychecks. Every dollar I had ever earned. They controlled all of it. That night I packed anyway. 2 shirts. A pair of jeans. My phone charger. A toothbrush. Everything fit inside a small backpack. When I opened the front door, my mother was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. My father stood behind her like a wall. If you leave, my mother said quietly, you are dead to us. My father did not say anything. He did not need to. I stepped outside. The night air was cold and silent. For a moment I hesitated on the porch. Then I opened my banking app. Balance, $0. They had already taken everything. I turned back toward the door. I need my birth certificate, I said. And my social security card. My father spoke through the screen door. Those belong to this house. Then he closed the door. At 9:47 p.m., I walked down the driveway with $12 in my pocket and nowhere to go. I had no identification. No job. No place to sleep. But for the first time in my life, no one was controlling where I went. 2 hours later I was sitting on the curb outside a gas station on Route 18 when my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Come home. Apologize. I might forgive you. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned my phone off. Not because I was brave. Because the battery was about to die. And I had to figure out how to survive the night. The first night after I left home, I did not sleep at all. I sat on the curb outside a gas station on Route 18, wrapped in my thin jacket while trucks rumbled in and out of the parking lot. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed constantly, casting everything in a pale white glow. Every now and then someone walked inside the store and glanced at me sitting there, but no one asked questions. I understood why. People see someone alone in the middle of the night and they assume 2 things. Either you are trouble. Or you are someone else's problem. By 3 in the morning the cold had settled deep into my bones. My phone had died hours earlier, leaving me with nothing but $12 and the sound of cars passing on the highway. Around 5, the sky began turning gray. The same cashier who had watched me from behind the counter the night before came outside to unlock the garbage bins. She paused when she saw me still sitting there. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she sighed and walked over. You been here all night? She asked. I nodded. She studied my face carefully, like she was trying to figure out my story without asking for it. Finally she reached into her pocket and pulled out a napkin. She wrote something on it with a pen. Go here, she said, handing it to me. I looked down at the address. Harbor Street Community Shelter. It opens at 8, she said. They might have a bed. Thank you, I whispered. She nodded once and went back inside the store. That was the closest thing to kindness I had experienced in days. The shelter sat inside an old warehouse on Harbor Street. The building looked worn down, but when I stepped inside, warm air rushed over me like a blanket. There were rows of metal beds, a shared kitchen, and a faint smell of soup and cleaning supplies. A woman with short brown hair stood behind a desk near the entrance. Her name tag read Melissa Carter. She looked at me gently. "First time here?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me a towel and pointed toward a row of beds near the back. "Bed 14 is open," she said. "You can start there." She did not ask what had happened. She did not ask why I had nowhere else to go. Before I walked away, she said one more thing. "You do not have to explain why you are here," she told me. "You just have to want to get back up." For the first time since leaving home, I felt something close to relief. The next few weeks were slow and exhausting. I began the process of replacing my documents. Without identification, it felt like I barely existed. A replacement birth certificate would take 6 to 8 weeks. The DMV refused to issue me a proper ID without more paperwork. Every step forward seemed to take months. To earn my meals at the shelter, I washed dishes and swept floors. It was not glamorous work, but it kept my hands busy and my mind from drifting back to my parents. And I kept applying for jobs. This time I searched much farther away. Towns 30 or 40 miles from Raven Hollow. Places my parents had never been. Places where no one knew my name. I told myself distance would protect me. I told myself my parents could not possibly reach that far. I believed that lie for exactly 3 weeks. Because when the restaurant in Granton called to cancel my interview after receiving a suspicious email with a fake police report attached, I realized something terrifying. My parents had not stopped. They had simply gotten better at ruining my life. And that was the moment I understood something important. This was never about protecting me. My parents were trying to make sure I had no choice but to crawl back home. What they did not realize yet was that I would rather sleep in a shelter forever than give them that victory. Life in the shelter slowly became a routine. Wake up early. Help clean the kitchen. Spend hours filling out job applications at the public library. Return in the evening and hope another rejection email had not arrived. Some days were harder than others. But at least in the shelter, no one controlled where I went or what I did. For the first time in my life, every decision belonged to me. That freedom came with a price. 3 weeks after I arrived, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry in the shelter basement. The number was familiar. My father. I stared at the screen for several seconds before opening the message. "Still cold out there? Your room is still here." I did not reply. I locked the phone and went back to folding shirts. The next message arrived 4 days later. "Your mother baked your favorite pie today. She cried when she realized you were not coming home." Again, I ignored it. But the messages kept coming. Always polite. Always calm. Always designed to make me question my decision. "We miss you. You made a mistake leaving. Come home and we can forget all this." At first they made me angry. Then they made me tired. Because every message carried the same quiet threat beneath the words. Return home. Or keep suffering. I started saving the texts instead of deleting them. I did not know why at the time. Something inside me simply whispered that they might matter later. One rainy Sunday afternoon my father called. "For reasons I still cannot explain," I answered. "Hello?" I said quietly. His voice sounded exactly the same as it always had. Calm. Confident. "Elena," he said. "You sound tired. What do you want?" "I want you to come home." I leaned against the wall of the laundry room. "Stop contacting my employers." A short pause followed. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he replied smoothly. "I know about the notebook." Silence filled the line. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Finally he spoke again. You have always had an active imagination. My hands tightened around the phone. You are destroying my life. No, he said calmly. You are doing that to yourself. I just want a job. You are not ready for the world, he replied. We are trying to help you. I do not need your help. Another pause. Then his voice turned colder. If you hang up this phone, you lose this family. The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I almost apologized. Almost said the words he wanted to hear. Instead, I took a deep breath. I already lost it, I said. Then I ended the call. My hands trembled as I placed the phone on the table beside me. But something had changed. The fear that once controlled me had started fading. Not because my situation was improving. Because I finally understood the truth. My parents did not want me safe. They wanted me dependent. And as long as I kept trying to build a life without them, they would keep trying to destroy it. Later that week, the shelter manager, Melissa, stopped me in the hallway. Someone came looking for you yesterday, she said. I froze. Who? A woman, Melissa replied. Said her name was Rachel Kane. My heart dropped. What did she want? Melissa shrugged. She asked if you were staying here. My stomach tightened. Did you tell her? Of course not, she said firmly. We do not give out resident information. She reached into her pocket and handed me a small business card. I figured you should see this though. I looked down at the card. Rachel Kane. Licensed private investigator. A cold wave of fear rushed through me. My first thought was obvious. My father had hired someone to find me. And if that was true, things were about to get much worse. For 2 days, I avoided leaving the shelter. Every time the front door opened, my stomach tightened. Every unfamiliar voice made my heart beat faster. I kept imagining a stranger walking through the entrance asking for me. A private investigator. The words felt heavy and dangerous. My father had always believed in control. If he thought I had disappeared too far beyond his reach, hiring someone to track me down sounded exactly like something he would do. On the 3rd day, Melissa found me sitting in the corner of the common room with my laptop. You cannot hide forever, she said gently. I am not hiding, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. Then why have you not stepped outside since Monday? I did not answer. Instead, I pulled the small business card from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. Melissa picked it up and studied the name. Rachel Kane, she read quietly. Private investigator. She came looking for me, I said. Melissa nodded slowly. That does not automatically mean she is working for your parents. It is too much of a coincidence. Maybe, she said. Maybe not. She handed the card back to me. Sometimes the only way to stop being afraid of something is to face it. That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. By evening, curiosity had started pushing harder than fear. I stepped outside the shelter for the first time in days and walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop on Harbor Street. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card. The call connected after 2 rings. Rachel Kane speaking. Her voice sounded calm and professional. I hesitated for a moment before speaking. My name is Elena Hartley, I said quietly. There was a sudden pause on the other end. I have been trying to find you, Rachel replied. My chest tightened. Why? I would prefer to discuss that in person. A wave of anxiety rushed through me. Are you working for my parents? The silence that followed lasted long enough to make my pulse quicken. Then she said something I did not expect. No, Rachel said firmly. In fact, your parents have no idea I exist. I frowned. Then why are you looking for me? Another pause. Because your grandmother asked me to. The words made my mind stumble. My grandmother? Yes, Rachel said. That is impossible, I replied quietly. She passed away 3 years ago. I know, Rachel answered. That is when she hired me. The coffee shop suddenly felt very small. What are you talking about? I asked. Your grandmother, Margaret Johansson, came to my office shortly before she died, Rachel explained. She believed you might need help someday. My heart started beating faster. What kind of help? She left something in my care, Rachel said. For you. I swallowed slowly. What is it? Not something I am comfortable describing over the phone. Then what do you want from me? Rachel's answer came quickly. I want to meet you. A dozen worst-case scenarios rushed through my mind. Traps. Manipulation. Lies. But curiosity kept pushing forward. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, she replied. 10 o'clock. Where? There is a diner on Harbor Street called the Corner Lantern. I knew the place. It was only a few blocks from the shelter. Bring identification if you have it, Rachel added. I do not, I admitted. That is all right, she said calmly. I already know who you are. The call ended a few seconds later. I sat there staring at my phone long after the screen went dark. My grandmother had been the only person in my family who ever questioned my parents' strict rules. She used to whisper little things to me when no one else was around. You deserve your own life, she once said. At the time, I thought it was just comforting words. Now I wondered if she had known something much bigger. The next morning at 9:55, I walked toward the Corner Lantern with my heart pounding. Rachel Kane was already sitting inside. And beside her chair was a black leather briefcase. One my grandmother had apparently prepared years ago. Waiting for the exact moment I might need it. The moment I stepped out of the cafe, the cold evening air hit my face like a warning. Everything was finally starting to connect. For months I had believed that Ethan and Olivia were simply careless. Two selfish people sneaking around behind my back, thinking they were smarter than everyone else. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this was not just an affair. It was a plan. And the worst part? I had been part of it without even knowing. I walked slowly down the street, replaying every conversation from the past year. Every strange moment. Every lie that had once sounded harmless. The first clue had been the investment. 8 months ago, Ethan convinced me to put my savings into a startup he said his friend was building. He called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He had been unusually persuasive that night, sitting beside me on the couch with his arm around my shoulders. You trust me, right? He asked. Of course I did. I transferred nearly everything I had. Now, after speaking with Olivia's coworker earlier that day, I learned something interesting. That startup did not exist. The company registration listed Ethan and Olivia as partners. Not investors. Owners. Meaning the money I transferred had not gone into some mysterious business venture. It went directly to them. I stopped walking. The streetlights flickered on above me as the realization settled deep in my chest. They did not just betray me emotionally. They stole from me. My hands started shaking as I opened my phone again. I pulled up the transaction records and the documents Ethan had shown me months ago. Everything looked professional. Logos. Contracts. Digital signatures. But once I looked closer, the cracks were obvious. The address on the paperwork was fake. The company website had been registered only 2 weeks before Ethan showed it to me. And the legal advisor listed on the contract? A name that did not exist anywhere online. It was all fabricated. I felt something inside me change in that moment. The sadness that had been crushing me for weeks slowly began turning into something sharper. Something colder. Anger. Ethan and Olivia believed they had already won. They thought they had taken my money, my marriage, and my dignity without consequences. In their minds, I was probably still the naive woman crying alone in her apartment. But they forgot one thing about me. I might forgive many things, but I never forget betrayal. And I never walk away from a fight. As I continued down the street, a new plan began forming in my mind. If they wanted to play games with lies and deception, then I would let them. But this time the rules would be mine. Because Ethan and Olivia had no idea that someone else was about to start watching them very closely. And when they finally realized what was happening, it would already be too late. That night I barely slept. Not because I was heartbroken anymore, but because my mind would not stop working. The betrayal still hurt, of course. 12 years of marriage does not disappear overnight. But the pain had transformed into something sharper. Something controlled. Every emotion I felt was now fuel for what I planned to do next. Ethan and Olivia believed they had already taken everything from me. My trust. My marriage. My savings. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. The next morning I woke up before sunrise and opened my laptop. Instead of crying or staring at old photos like I had done weeks earlier, I started building a timeline. Every message Ethan had sent. Every bank transfer. Every suspicious moment from the past year. I created folders, screenshots, and notes. Slowly the pieces began fitting together like a puzzle. One detail stood out immediately. 3 months before I discovered the affair, Ethan insisted we move most of our shared money into the new investment account. At the time he said it would help us reduce taxes. Now I understood the real reason. He was moving assets. Preparing for something. Preparing to leave. But if Ethan thought he had covered his tracks, he was wrong. Because during those 12 years of marriage, Ethan had always trusted me with the finances. I paid the bills, tracked expenses, and managed most of our accounts. Which meant something very important. I still had access to almost everything. I logged into our shared cloud storage and started digging deeper into the documents he had uploaded months ago. Contracts, invoices, business plans. The files looked convincing at first glance. But the more I examined them, the more flaws appeared. Fake addresses. Inconsistent signatures. Dates that did not match. It was not just fraud. It was sloppy fraud. I leaned back in my chair and felt the first real sense of control since my life collapsed. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was the victim. But victims do not quietly collect evidence. And victims do not build cases. By noon I had already downloaded dozens of files and backed them up onto 2 separate drives. One copy stayed hidden in my apartment. The other I placed in a small envelope. Because I was about to visit someone Ethan would never expect. My brother Daniel. Daniel works as a financial investigator. He deals with fraud cases every day. We were not extremely close growing up, but one thing about Daniel never changed. He hates liars. And he hates criminals even more. When I walked into his office that afternoon, he immediately noticed the tension on my face. "Caroline," he said slowly. "What happened?" I placed the envelope on his desk. "Something illegal," I replied quietly. Daniel opened the envelope and started flipping through the documents. His expression changed with every page. Confusion. Curiosity. Then finally, anger. He looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" "My husband," I said calmly. The room went silent for several seconds. Daniel leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "If this is real," he said slowly, "this is serious fraud." I nodded. "I know." He studied me carefully before asking the question I had been waiting for. "What do you want to do about it?" For the first time since the betrayal began, I allowed myself a small smile. I want the truth to come out. Then I leaned forward slightly. But not yet. Because Ethan and Olivia still believed they were winning. And sometimes the best revenge is not immediate. Sometimes the smartest move is letting your enemies feel safe just a little longer. Daniel did not speak for a long moment. He sat quietly behind his desk, slowly turning the pages I had given him. The sound of paper sliding against paper filled the room, and with every passing second his expression grew darker. Finally, he set the documents down. "Caroline," he said carefully, "this is not just suspicious. This is full financial fraud." I nodded. I already knew that. Daniel tapped one of the contracts with his finger. "These signatures are fake. The business registration is questionable. And the money trail," he paused, glancing at me again. "The money trail leads directly to two personal accounts." "Ethan and Olivia," I said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You realize what this means, right?" "Yes," I answered calmly. "If this gets reported, they could both face serious legal consequences." Daniel leaned back in his chair and studied my face, as if trying to understand something deeper. "You are surprisingly calm about all this." I let out a quiet laugh. "Trust me. I was not calm a few weeks ago. That was the truth. There had been nights when I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Nights when the silence of my apartment felt unbearable. Nights when I questioned everything about myself. But those nights were over. Pain had a strange way of sharpening the mind. And now my mind was clearer than ever." Daniel crossed his arms. "So what exactly are you planning?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. "I am not ready to destroy them yet." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Not ready?" "No," I said. "Because right now they still think they are safe. They think they took everything and walked away without consequences." Daniel looked confused. "So why wait?" I leaned forward slightly. "Because people make the biggest mistakes when they feel comfortable." That sentence seemed to land. Daniel stared at me for several seconds before a slow understanding appeared in his eyes. "You want them to dig the hole deeper." "Exactly." I explained my plan. Ethan had not finalized the divorce yet. Legally, we were still married. Which meant the financial investigation could reveal far more than just the original fraud. If Ethan and Olivia continued operating their fake company, they would leave a longer trail. More transactions. More victims. More evidence. And when the truth finally surfaced, the consequences would be far worse. Daniel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You are playing a long game." "I learned from the best," I replied. Growing up, Daniel always said patience wins more battles than anger. Now I finally understood what he meant. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below. "If I start quietly monitoring these accounts," he said, "it will not raise suspicion. But if something illegal continues happening, I will have to report it eventually." That is exactly what I want. Daniel turned back toward me. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes." He studied me one last time before nodding. "All right," he said. "Then we do this carefully." A strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time since Ethan betrayed me, I no longer felt alone in the fight. But as I left Daniel's office that afternoon, another thought crossed my mind. Because there was still one part of the story Ethan and Olivia did not know. They believed the worst thing they had done to me was steal my money. But the truth was, the real damage they caused had nothing to do with finances. And very soon, they were about to learn exactly what it feels like when someone they underestimated stops playing nice. For the next 2 weeks, I did something that would have been impossible for me just a month earlier. I acted normal. I answered Ethan's occasional texts politely. I kept my replies short, calm, and almost indifferent. If someone had read our conversation, they would think we were simply two adults navigating a quiet separation. That illusion was exactly what I wanted. Because while Ethan believed everything was settling peacefully, Daniel had already started digging. Every few days he would call me with small updates. At first the information was subtle. New transfers. Unusual deposits. Strange payments coming from accounts that clearly belonged to other individuals. But by the end of the first week, the pattern became obvious. Ethan and Olivia had not stopped their scheme. They had expanded it. Their fake startup was now attracting multiple investors. Daniel discovered at least 4 people who had transferred large amounts of money into the same account where my savings had gone. I felt a strange mix of emotions when I heard that. Anger. Validation. And something darker. Because Ethan did not just betray me. He was doing the same thing to others. Daniel called me late one evening with another update. "You were right about waiting," he said. "What did you find?" "There are now 7 different transfers linked to the company." 7 people who believed Ethan's lies. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining the confidence Ethan must be feeling. The arrogance. The belief that he had outsmarted everyone. "Is it enough?" I asked. Daniel paused. "More than enough." But then he added something else. "However, there is another detail you should know." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" Daniel sighed quietly. "It looks like Ethan is preparing to leave the country." The words hit me like cold water. Leave? Yes. 2 large withdrawals were made yesterday. And there is a plane ticket purchase linked to his account. My hands slowly clenched around the phone. Of course he was planning an escape. People like Ethan never stay around when the consequences start approaching. "When?" I asked. "Next week." The timing suddenly made sense. He was gathering money quickly, convincing as many investors as possible, then disappearing before anyone realized the truth. And Olivia? She was probably planning to disappear with him. For several seconds neither Daniel nor I spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Do you want me to move forward with the report?" I stared out the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. This was the moment. The moment where everything could finally collapse for Ethan. But something inside me said to wait just a little longer. "One more day," I said. Daniel sounded surprised. "Caroline, if he leaves the country?" "He will not get far," I interrupted calmly. Because there was still one thing Ethan had not considered. One thing he had completely forgotten. He still needed my signature to finalize the divorce settlement. And tomorrow. He had asked to meet me. Apparently, he wanted to end things peacefully. I almost laughed when I read that message earlier. Peacefully. The man who lied to me, cheated on me, and stole my savings believed we were going to have a calm conversation over coffee. Daniel finally spoke again. "What are you planning?" I looked at the folder of evidence sitting on my table. Every document. Every transfer. Every lie. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "Ethan is going to realize something very important." "What?" I allowed myself a slow breath. That the woman he betrayed was the worst possible enemy he could have made. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. It was a quiet place near the river, the kind of calm cafe where couples usually came for relaxed conversations. Ethan had chosen it himself, probably thinking the peaceful atmosphere would make everything easier. For him. I sat near the window and ordered coffee while I waited. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. If someone looked at me from across the room, they would see nothing unusual. Just a woman waiting for her soon-to-be ex-husband. But inside my bag sat the truth that could destroy his entire life. Exactly at 11, Ethan walked through the door. For a brief moment, seeing him again after weeks apart felt strange. 12 years of memories do not disappear overnight. His face was still familiar. His voice still sounded the same. But the man I once loved no longer existed. This was someone else now. Someone I finally saw clearly. Ethan smiled when he approached the table, the same charming smile that used to make people trust him instantly. "Caroline," he said, sitting down. "You look good." "Thank you," I replied calmly. He looked relieved. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the casual tone of his voice. He had expected tension, maybe even anger. Instead, he saw a calm woman sipping coffee. Exactly what I wanted him to see. After a few minutes of small talk, Ethan finally got to the point. "I think it is time we finalize everything," he said. "The divorce paperwork is ready." He slid a folder across the table toward me. I opened it slowly and began reading the documents. Everything was exactly as Daniel predicted. Ethan wanted the process finished quickly. He was offering a simple settlement, hoping I would sign without asking questions. In exchange, he would keep the majority of the financial assets that were now supposedly tied to his business. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. "Seems straightforward," I said quietly. Ethan smiled again. "I thought you would appreciate keeping things simple." Simple. The word hung in the air between us. I closed the folder and looked at him for several seconds. Long enough for a small hint of nervousness to appear in his eyes. Then I reached into my bag. But instead of pulling out a pen, I placed another folder on the table. A thicker one. Ethan frowned slightly. "What is that?" "Something you should see before I sign anything." He opened the folder. At first his expression was neutral. He scanned the first page quickly, clearly expecting something minor. Then he turned the second page. And the third. Slowly, the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "Evidence," I replied. Inside the folder were copies of everything Daniel had gathered. Bank transfers. Fake contracts. Business registrations. Investor payments. And at the bottom of the final page, a summary report outlining potential charges for financial fraud. Ethan stared at the documents like they might disappear if he blinked. "This is ridiculous," he said suddenly, though his voice had lost its confidence. "Is it?" He looked up at me, panic now clearly visible in his eyes. "Caroline, you do not understand how business works." 7 investors, I interrupted calmly. "Including me." His mouth slowly closed. The silence between us grew heavy. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What do you want?" That question had been coming from the moment I walked into the restaurant. I folded my hands together on the table. "I want honesty," I said. Ethan laughed nervously. "You already know the situation." "No," I replied quietly. "I want you to explain it." Right there. At that table. Every lie. Every theft. Every betrayal. And the most interesting part? Ethan still had no idea that the worst part of his day had not happened yet. Because while we were sitting in that quiet restaurant, someone else had just walked through the door. Ethan's hands were trembling. It was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. The confident man who once believed he controlled every situation was now staring at the evidence in front of him like a cornered animal. "This is insane," he muttered, flipping through the pages again. "You are completely misunderstanding the situation." I leaned back in my chair and watched him calmly. "Then explain it." He looked up at me, searching my face for any sign of weakness. Maybe he expected me to break down. Maybe he thought I was bluffing. But all he saw was patience. And that terrified him more than anger ever could. Businesses fail sometimes, he said quickly. Investments move around. You are acting like this is some kind of crime. 7 investors, I repeated quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was going to pay everyone back. When? He did not answer. Because there was no good answer. For several seconds, the only sound between us was the quiet chatter of other customers in the restaurant. People laughing, waiters walking past, dishes clinking softly. The normal world continued around us. Meanwhile, Ethan's carefully constructed lies were collapsing piece by piece. Finally, he pushed the folder away from him. What do you want, Caroline? He asked again, this time more seriously. That question had become his last defense. Because if he could turn this into a negotiation, maybe he could still escape. I slowly took a sip of my coffee before answering. What I want, I said calmly, is for you to stop pretending. Ethan frowned. You lied to me for over a year. You stole my savings. You convinced other people to trust you and then took their money too. His voice suddenly dropped. Lower your voice. No. That single word froze him. For the first time since I met Ethan 12 years ago, he looked genuinely afraid of me. But the real surprise had not arrived yet. At that exact moment, someone stepped up to our table. Excuse me, a familiar voice said. Ethan turned his head. The moment he saw Daniel standing beside us, the last bit of color disappeared from his face. My brother gave him a polite but cold smile. Ethan, Daniel said calmly. Nice to finally meet you in person. Ethan looked from Daniel to me, confusion quickly turning into dread. What is this? Daniel placed a thin folder on the table beside the evidence Ethan had already seen. Unlike my folder, this one had an official-looking header printed across the top. Daniel spoke again, his voice steady and professional. I work with financial investigations. Recently, we received documentation regarding a fraudulent investment operation. Ethan's breathing became shallow. This is harassment, he said quickly. You cannot just accuse someone. Daniel calmly opened the folder and turned it toward him. Inside were copies of every transaction Daniel had tracked over the past 2 weeks. Not just mine. All 7 investors. Every payment. Every transfer. Every lie. I am not accusing you, Daniel said quietly. I am documenting. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the table between us. Ethan stared at the evidence like a man realizing the walls around him had suddenly closed. Then Daniel delivered the final sentence. The authorities will be reviewing this case very soon. Ethan's voice cracked when he finally spoke. You set me up. I looked him directly in the eyes. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. And as Ethan sat there, completely trapped by the truth he created, one final realization slowly appeared on his face. He was not leaving the country next week. He was not escaping with Olivia. Because the game he thought he was winning had already ended. Ethan sat frozen in his chair. For the first time in the 12 years I had known him, he looked completely powerless. The confident smile he used so easily was gone. The calm voice he relied on to charm people had disappeared. All that remained was panic. You cannot do this, he said quietly, his voice strained. Daniel did not react. He simply stood beside the table with the calm patience of someone who had seen situations like this many times before. Actually, Daniel replied, this is exactly how financial investigations begin. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. This is a misunderstanding. Investments fail all the time. Daniel shook his head slightly. Investments fail, he said. But fake companies, fabricated contracts, and diverted funds are something else entirely. The words hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, Ethan looked at me again. But this time his expression was different. Not anger. Not arrogance. Desperation. Caroline, he said, leaning forward slightly. We can fix this. I said nothing. We can work something out, he continued quickly. You know me. You know I would never actually hurt you. The irony of that sentence almost made me laugh. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of trust. And he still believed I would ignore everything he had done. You already hurt me, I replied quietly. The simplicity of that sentence seemed to land harder than anything else I had said that day. Ethan opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Daniel closed the folder of documents and slid it back toward himself. This conversation is not an arrest, he said calmly. But the information will be forwarded for formal review. Ethan looked at the evidence one last time before slowly pushing his chair back. So that is it, he asked bitterly. You destroy my life and just walk away? I stood up from the table. No, I said calmly. You destroyed your own life. For several seconds Ethan stared at me, searching for something. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe regret. But he found neither. Because the woman standing in front of him was no longer the one he betrayed. That woman had disappeared the night I discovered the truth. What remained was someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone who would never allow herself to be used again. Ethan finally grabbed his jacket and walked out of the restaurant without another word. The door closed behind him with a quiet sound that felt strangely final. Daniel looked at me. You all right? I took a slow breath and looked out the window toward the river. The water moved calmly under the afternoon sunlight, completely indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded inside the cafe. For the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. Yes, I said softly. I think I finally am. Daniel gave a small nod. What happens now? I thought about that question for a moment. Ethan would face the consequences of his choices. The investigation would move forward. Olivia would eventually be pulled into it as well. But none of that mattered to me anymore. Because revenge had never really been the goal. The goal was freedom. Freedom from lies. Freedom from betrayal. Freedom from the version of myself that once believed love meant ignoring red flags. As Daniel and I walked out of the restaurant together, the cool air outside felt different somehow. Like the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something important. Losing Ethan had not ruined my life. It had saved it.